Hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today we'll be carrying on with my library tour for 2024. We're kind of nearing the end now of this section of the library tour, which is of the two bookcases here that you can normally see behind me in the rest of my videos. And it's been quite fun going through them. That they've definitely changed as we've been going on. I think that's, from what I can tell from other booktubers, that tends to be what happens when you're going through a bookcase tour like this. Is you're going through kind of re-evaluating how you've organised things, but also I suppose there are so many books up on shelves. There's a lot of information to process, and so it's also a way of re-evaluating what's there. There might be things you've sort of forgotten about, or you knew were there but hadn't really thought about how much you want them to be there, and things like that. So things have come in, things have come out, and have been reshuffled a little, um, which has been a lot of fun. So I've been able to talk about them with you, but I've also been able to work out what's going on for my own sanity. But we're carrying on today with a shelf full of stuff that I really love. We're going, for anyone who's interested, who wants to guess what's coming up, from the letters P through to T. So that's Papa through to Tango. And I'll just move the bits over the top like a shell from Guernsey and some Paris photos. I've gone through some of the bits and bobs that I keep on top of my shelves before. There's my little yoga frog and random pebbles. But yeah, there's quite a mix here. Some things I've read quite a few times, some things that I really need to get round to, things I've picked up relatively recently to get round to. This is one I picked up about a year ago, and I feel a bit daunted about jumping in, I suppose, but we'll see how it goes. It's Life, a User's Manual by Georges Perec. I have heard from Elizabeth from Bookhands and Books that Georges Perec is a lot of fun. I think that this is one of those books where there's absolutely no synopsis on the back. I picked this up based purely on the name Georges Perec ringing a bell. But then I'm sort of looking at the size of it and then getting an idea of what it's supposed to be, which is sort of the story of a building, I think, through its various inhabitants. I might be wrong there, but that's roughly the idea. And a book I read last year called The House of Government, a non-fiction about a house in Moscow during the time of the Soviet Union, sort of took this as a model. Well, there were quite a few models, but this was one of them. And so they gave me an idea of maybe what to expect, and I think I would enjoy it. I just need to get around to it at some point. Moving on, we've got The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. I've read this, I think, 2 times, and on the whole, really enjoy it. The last time I read it, actually no, both times I read it, I was annotating, and because the book is kind of it's full of pseudo diary entries and aphorisms and random thoughts, and so it's the perfect kind of book to for someone like me who doesn't normally annotate their books, to sort of play around with that and to talk back to the book and have a conversation with it, particularly since it's a book kind of full of some rather snobbish opinions and a lot of self-pity, and a lot of truisms and things like that. And suddenly as a reader you realise you don't have to take this at face value, and you can talk back to the book. So I really enjoyed that. This is a translation by is it Margaret Jules Costa, if I'm remembering. Margaret Jules Costa, yeah. And there's another one translated by Richard Zenith, which reorganizes it to make it a little more, I suppose, make it make a little more sense chronologically, I suppose, since it's such a fragmentary text. So part of the translator and editor's job isn't just getting a good translation and adding notes and things like that, but it's also working out what order all these fragments are supposed to go in, because there was no order. And so any, more or less any translation, any edition of the Book of Disquiet that you're going to get is going to be very different because of how it's been ordered. So I'd quite like to read Richard Zenith's translation, because the last time I read this, I was reading it along with Classics and Company, and quite a few of the people who were reading the Zenith translation were getting some different impressions from it. So yeah, really interesting. So it's a book that I'm not finished with, even though I've only read it a couple of times. I'll try and speed up now. Next up, we've got The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Reread it recently. It's, I still think, a great novel, and after such a long time between readings, I'd forgotten how funny it was as well. It's a really funny novel, even if it's heartbreaking and unbearable at some other moments. Then one to get to, Gateway by Frederick Pohl. Hopefully later this year. I've been trying to read a little more science fiction and fantasy this year, but I often get distracted. Then we've got A Girl of the Limberlost by Jean Stratton Porter. This is one that my wife picked up, and then she realised that it's, I think it's the second book in a series, and so it hasn't been read yet. So maybe eventually we'll pick up the first book. But we might be wrong there. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's about a young girl growing up in a swamp. So sounds good. Next up, we've got Full Moon by Caradog Pritchard. Sort of a great Welsh book, from what I can tell. I haven't read it yet. This has been brought out and translated as One Moonlit Night relatively recently. That it's the exact same book, from what I can tell. And again, there's not much information actually in this edition about what the book is actually about. But a lot of people on BookTube have enjoyed it, and it was a name I recognised from, I think, from school, because I went to a Welsh-speaking school. And then next up, we've got Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho. I think this is a lot of fun, just a crazy, convoluted gothic novel, full of atmosphere and just sort of ludicrous ways to just keep the plot going and stretch it out as far as it can go. So some people find it a bit annoying, I think, for that reason. But there's something about these gothic novels that I just love. They're just so sensational and over the top sometimes. Then we've got All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. I'm not entirely sure how the surname's pronounced there. One I'd like to get to eventually. It's not very long at all, but I've heard it's very good and very, very powerful. A powerful book about the First World War. And then we've got The Captain's Daughter by Alexander Pushkin. So far, this is the only thing that I've read by Pushkin, but I really, really enjoyed it. It's just a lot of fun, about a young soldier falling in love with captain's daughter when he's posted somewhere, but it's all set against a kind of an uprising going on. So there's this kind of fairy tale-esque atmosphere is quite, it is disrupted quite quickly by some fairly brutal violence, but it's very fast paced and just a lot of fun. So even though at times it might seem a bit silly and whimsical. Other times suddenly it's quite brutal, and yet somehow Pushkin sort of holds it all together and just keeps keeps those pages going, and you're just want to keep turning them. Another one I'd like to get to at some point. It's one I've had around for quite a while, and I can't really give a reason why I haven't read it yet. It's Jose Saramago, Blindness. I think it's the premise is kind of similar to Day of the Triffids, from what I can tell. Suddenly, everyone is, or almost everyone on Earth, is inflicted with a blindness, and he sort of takes it in a different direction to Day of the Triffids. But it is all about how people react to it, maybe how the government reacts to it. So sort of an exploration of human nature, I think, through this sort of cataclysmic event. Then we've got some Jean-Paul Sartre. So we've got Nausea, which so far is the only thing I've read by him. I really quite enjoyed it as a novel, and for the ideas that he's sort of exploring in here. I think people often talk about, because one of the big things in this book is the sort of this very almost sickening or nauseating feeling of realizing that you exist and this body is yours and everything around you exists, and yet being unable to attach any meaning to it. And so a lot of people kind of big that up, and sort of, I don't know, talk about either how profound it is or how difficult it might be to come across these ideas. And yet again, kind of like The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, that there is a lot of this these sort of extreme sensations and emotions going on. But it's also very funny. I think this is much funnier. I think Sartre meant it to be much funnier than something like The Bell Jar. And I don't think you have to take the main character here quite so seriously as you would if you just take him at face value, and his snobbishness and I don't know, his sort of misanthropic way of sort of seeing other people. Yeah, you don't really have to take that on board. You can laugh at him for it, and so yeah, it's a book I enjoy on different levels, and I don't often hear people talking quite so much about the book's humour. And then there's some more Sartre that I would like to get to eventually. Um, I've got I think the first two books of the Roads to the Roads to Freedom trilogy. So I've got The Age of Reason. Whoops, there we go. The Age of Reason, which is the first one. I think it's essentially just all about the being in Paris in the lead up to the Second World War, and it's followed up by The Reprieve, with a really interesting Picasso for the cover, and there's a third one. I keep forgetting the title to, and I haven't read any of them yet, so I'll read through the first couple and see. Well, if I've read two, I'll have to read the third one. I don't think I could justify not reading it. Then next up, we've got Vertigo by W.G. Sebald. I really quite like this. I think some people who have read all of Sebald, or at least his sort of major works, probably plonk this down at the bottom. But I still really enjoyed it. It is like a lot of Sebald in something like this. It's really hard to sort of summarize what's going on. The main thing I can remember are just some of the journeys that are depicted either by the kind of speaker or the narrator, whether that's Sebald or someone else, to their hometown, into I don't know. I'm not sure whether it quite goes into the Black Forest, but just sort of across sort of certain areas of Germany, and some of the descriptions of the landscape sort of stayed with me, and the way that sort of connects to some Kafka stories as well. There's a really interesting sort of connection that I could see coming, and then it was really rewarding to have it confirmed later on, and that was really quite cool. And then another one of his that I think a lot of people say is his best, and I haven't got to it yet, and it's Austerlitz. So I'll report back on this later. Then we've got City by Clifford D. Simak. I read this just a little earlier this year, back in March, and it's a fix-up novel, so loads of short stories that have been worked together to create a larger narrative. And it was a lot of fun, actually, and the story they had about the advancement of humanity, yeah, it was quite cynical, but really fascinating. So for probably people like me who don't read a lot of sci-fi, it's a good kind of entryway into it, I suppose. Yeah, another book that I really really need to get to at some point is Death Threats and Other Stories by Georges Simenon. So these are, from what I can tell, they're Maigret short stories. So I'll try these out, and then eventually and then work out whether I want to pick up some more Maigret novels. Then there is Hyperion by Dan Simmons, a book I can remember probably around the time I started BookTube, I heard people talking about it, and I was really intrigued. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it took me quite a long time to pick it up. But I eventually found myself a copy, and at some point I will read it. I was maybe planning to read it this year, but I've also seen that Sean D. Standfast and a few people may be reading this and some other books by Dan Simmons next year, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So I might hold off and join in with them. But again, we'll see how that goes. Next up, a couple of Steinbeck books. There's In Dubious Battle, which is about fruit pickers in California, and it's about sort of socialists infiltrating the workers to get some strike action, and to sort of aggravate the business owners, and you know, get things moving on. And I really love it, and it explores, I suppose, just how just the normal everyday people get caught in these sort of bigger sort of conflicts, how they're being used by the people who own the orchards. They're also being used by the socialists in this context as well. No one's really seeing them as individuals or as people, and it gets pretty brutal towards the end. Then next up, one I've been really meaning to read. There have been at least two read-alongs of this book since I started BookTube, and I've just never been able to join in. But it's East of Eden, and it's been on my shelves for ages, for probably six or 7 years, and I haven't got to it yet. So yeah, at some point I need to rectify that. Then we've got Dracula by Bram Stoker. Really one of my all-time favourite novels. Similar to a lot of sort of, well, I suppose it is a gothic novel. It's just a romp, and it's a bit over the top. And again, I think not quite so much as something like Mysteries of Udolpho. There is a lot of padding going on in here, and he's pushing out the plot as far as it can, well, maybe not as far as it can go, but he is pushing things out a bit, I think. And yet it's still a lot of fun, and it sort of just carries you along. And for me, I'm excited all the way through. Some people find The middle, not quite so interesting, but I really love it. And then we've got Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. I just read this earlier this week and really, really enjoyed it. It's I suppose, kind of a first contact novel, just without the emphasis on the contact itself. It's about what happens afterwards, after the aliens have left. And I suppose in a way that there hasn't really been any contact, that the aliens have turned up on Earth and have left. And one of the, I suppose, heartbreaking things for some of the people trying to work out what's just happened is the fact that these aliens were pretty much oblivious to the fact that there was human life on Earth. They probably saw humans as fairly inconsequential wildlife, with sort of no real reason to contact them, and then they've just left all this rubbish that people are sort of scavenging and sort of you're sort of stealing from these zones where the contact happened, and scientists are trying to work out how they work, to try and figure out alien technology. But at the same time, this is just the rubbish that they left, and so the fact that it's being given so much significance is, I suppose, kind of absurd, and yet at the same time, alien contact, it might only happen once, and so I suppose they have to make the best of it. Then next up, all that's left now is tons of Leo Tolstoy. So at the beginning of this year, I picked up a good pile of Tolstoy because I really enjoy him. I really love his writing, and I suppose his concerns and things he thinks are important, or at least with what I've read so far. Even in the stuff I haven't enjoyed as much, I've seen something to appreciate at least, and so I just picked up loads. So we've got the collected shorter fiction in a Everyman's Library. What do you call it? Like a slipcase. So these are all of his sort of short stories, novellas, things like that. And then I also picked up The Cossacks as well, which is a short novel, not included in that story. I think there are a couple of other shorter things, shorter novels and things that aren't included in there. I think the notable one that stands out is Resurrections, which I've heard is really, really good. But I think I've got a fair bit of Tolstoy to get through before I get to Resurrections. And that sort of collection of his shorter works that I've got has got famous things like the death of Ivan Illich and things like that in there. And then we've got War and Peace. This is the Pevier Bolkonsky translation. And although don't particularly have anything against the Mauds, Louise and Alma Maud, for their translations from the Russian, on the whole, I think I did actually prefer the Pevier Bolkonsky translation of this. So I'm not exactly sure why, but there's just something to it that resonated a little more with me, I think. I'm really intrigued to try the Anthony Briggs translation, which I think is one of them, might be the most recent English language translation of War and Peace. And so I've read it a couple of times in the space of about 2 years, something like that. And so I think I'll have a bit of a break from War and Peace, give it some more time to settle, because I was definitely feeling the last time I read it earlier this year, it may have been a little too close to the first time I read it, and that might be part of the reason why I didn't feel I enjoyed the Maud translation as much, was because it was very close to the first time I read it, and I suppose you can only really read it for the first time once, and so there'll be a kind of magic to that first time I read through it, I suppose. So it might be that the translation by the Volkonskis might turn out I don't actually enjoy it as much. It's just the memory of reading it for the first time is sort of imbued and sort of mixed up in with that translation. And then, before I ramble on for too long, the last book is Anna Karenina, and this is the Maud translation, and I got on with it fine. I really enjoyed it. I may enjoy other translations of Anna Karenina, but I enjoyed it. Don't quite enjoy. I don't think I like it quite as much as War and Peace. I think just War and Peace is trying to do so much more than Anna Karenina, but it's one that I would love to get back to eventually. Again, I'll give it some time of at least a couple of years, and then I'll try it again, whether in this translation or in another. And that's it for now. So we've got essentially just one more shelf to go for this section of the library tour, I suppose, and then I'll work out what we'll be doing next. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.